Oh, you had to remind me of Smallville, didn't you? Anyway, aside from, some technical issues on Monster's end and him reminding me that the Wonder Twins were in Smallville, making me think about, how terrible they are as characters. There's asshole. But as I was trying to say, what are some things, we have a love of like B movies and stuff, but also I kind of like collecting old time radio, like a lot of the old time radio shows like back in the 30s and 40s before TV was invented. Stuff like The Lone Ranger and Planet X-1 and stuff like that.
One hobby of mine that I like to do is, aside from comic books and video games and shit, is that I'm a very big film buff. I even write a couple of my own stories myself.
I've gotten into creative writing as well, and I think that that's something that we also share. Like, you did a Conan story in 6th grade, and I recently did Batman Art of Conquest, my very first fanfic, let alone first story I've ever wrote.
Yeah, that's another thing too. I'm very much into really old literature, like adventure stories, horror
Lovecraft.
Stories, like H.P. Lovecraft, Robert Bloch.
And it's funny because
Washington.
I think besides comic books, I'm a very huge Michael Crichton fan, and I also really love like the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes stories. Like anything that's got Sherlock Holmes, I like it because Sherlock Holmes, I believe Batman said it best in Brave and the Bold. He is the world's greatest detective, even to Batman. Even Batman was inspired by Sherlock Holmes.
Exactly, and just like how you're into Arthur Conan Doyle, I'm into Robert Howard, the guy who created, of course, for those of you who don't know, Robert Howard was the creator of Conan the Barbarian. And I'm a very big Conan fan, which you just said I wrote a Conan story in 6th grade that got me into a lot of trouble because it had a lot of gore and nudity and sex and stuff. That caused me to get into a whole lot of trouble with my teacher. And also, Howard made a whole bunch of other characters like Cole the Conqueror and, of course, Solomon Kane, who, for those of you who are wondering, the picture I have up on my YouTube channel is actually a picture of Solomon Kane, the Robert Howard character. So if those of you who are wondering who that...
I thought it was V from V for Vendetta.
No, it's Solomon Kane.
But I think another thing about me that I love, and it's one that I have very slight memory problems for, but I'm a bit of a history buff. Like, I love studying history. And also, I think one of the main expertise areas, I don't want to say expertise, but one of the areas that I try to be very thorough in is mythology. Because mythology and legends, they're just as important to history as they are to pretty much storytelling in general. I mean, if you think, people say that, well, what does Greek mythology have to do with anything, Steve? It's like, okay, think about Hercules. The Greek hero Hercules, pretty much for that time, he was like that version of Superman.
Greek mythology is very important to us in modern society.
And, okay, think about it, and you'll agree with this comparison, Monster. Jason and the Argonauts, what were they? They were pretty much the Greek version of the Justice League.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I can very much agree with that. And I think Jack Kirby said it best, We need a new type of mythology for people to look at. That's what we find in comic books. In comic books we find a mythology. We find characters to look up to. We find stories that resonate with us personally.
And and that's
comic books are so essential to our daily lives.
Well, we can actually save a lot of our thoughts on that for the next discussion, because part of our next discussion we're gonna talk about why, as comic book fans, from me and Monster's perspective, why we like seeing our favorite characters, or just comic book characters in general, be adapted to the big screen or animation, and why we want them done right. And also, how, like you said, literature and mythology are important, not just in comics, but just in history in general, and how they give us heroes to look up to. I wasn't expecting you to kind of go on that rant a little bit, but, no, I mean, it's...
And of course, I mean, let's face it, if we didn't have comic books to influence us, to influence our morals and our values, then I don't think we would have as many...
And honestly, that's one thing that I wane at.
...citizens that we have today.
Honestly, that's one thing that I kind of wane at. And that's one thing that was kind of a question that most people, not just at work, but one or two people on YouTube have asked me. It's like, oh, you try to be so self-righteous and that you believe that kids should read comic books. Who are you to tell parents what to do? Well, you know what? I'm sorry, but you know what? Parents need to give their kids comics, and I'm not talking about some of the more dark and gritty comics. I'm talking about like the old school comics. We're talking like, on the level of obscurity like Batman Brave and the Bold. Because when you look at Batman Brave and the Bold, it's not a dark show. And I had to correct a customer because she said that, oh, Batman's just a dark and brooding character. I don't see, why kids are so appealed to a guy who beats up criminals. And it's like, I'm sorry, but, Batman is a character that, yes, he's portrayed as always being dark and brooding, but if you look at the 1960s Adam West TV show and Brave and the Bold, he can also be portrayed as a light-hearted, very fun-loving and awesome character. And I think that that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand about comic books in general, Monster, is that you can take a lot of the dark and brooding characters, especially a character like Daredevil or even the Punisher, and you can try to tone them down and make them, just as cool. I mean, when I saw Blade for the first time in the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, that shocked me because Blade was always a very dark, character.
Yeah, and the live-action Wesley Snipes movies are, they're pretty gory and violent and, profane, but yet they actually managed to include Blade from a character from an R-rated movie into a children's Spider-Man show.
Well, an R-rated comic book character, and I mean, even a character like Ghost Rider was put in the Fantastic Four animated, cartoon. So I really don't.
And he was also included in the animated Hulk series as well.
And I mean, honestly, that's one thing that kind of upsets me a little bit. Is all these soccer moms and hardcore anti-comic bookists who say that kids are going to become juvenile delinquents from reading comics, that that they're going to become purely evil and kill people. Well, you know what? Comic books teach kids morals, but you know what? In the end result, like everything else, Monster, whose responsibility is it to make sure that kids, walk the straight and narrow? Okay. Bit of a blooper there. It's the parents, y'all. The parents are just as responsible. Wait for a Monster to come